Hey everyone, I'm your host, Robbie Straczynski, and thanks so much for joining us on episode number 36 of CardsChat, the friendliest poker podcast in town. Today, we are joined by Ari Engel, with over $7 million in all-time live tournament winnings and countless millions more earned online. Ari's achievements also include a WSOP Bracelet, as well as emerging victorious in the 2016 Aussie Millions Main Event. Add to that 9 WSOP Circuit Rings and 2 American Poker Awards, and we've got a real winner on the show today. Today, our conversation will focus mostly on getting to know who this top professional poker player is off the felt. Ari, welcome to the CardsChat Podcast.
Hi, Robbie. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to be speaking with you. We've spoken quite a bit. We've done a couple sort of written interviews in the past, but never like a whole hour-long conversation. And, I got to say, this is something I've really been looking forward to do for a long time.
Awesome. Thanks.
Cool. So, again, you've been interviewed, you've been around in poker for many, many years. You've been interviewed numerous times. So I did kind of want to try to make today's conversation a little bit unique. And I'm actually in a pretty cool position to do precisely that, as you and I come from very similar backgrounds and upbringing. So to everyone who's watching and listening, to be sure, we will cover some poker during today's conversation, but I'm hoping we'll all really get to know Ari on a deeper level and cover some ground he's perhaps never covered before. So Ari, tell us and tell our audience about your early years. Where were you born, about your family, and what kind of education you had growing up?
Okay. I was born in Toronto. My parents met there and quickly moved out, though. Less than a year old, we moved to South Africa, where my mother's dad had been a rabbi there. My father is a rabbi also. He got his first job in a little town in South Africa called Boksburg. Left there when I was 3 years old, so I don't remember anything from there. Moved to Australia, Melbourne, Australia. That's where my first memories were. I had a full Australian accent for a while. Lived there till around 11 years old. We then spent a year in Israel, where my mother, she's a Jewish studies teacher. She went on a fellowship program to Bar Ilan University and lived in Jerusalem, Har Nof neighborhood for a year. And I, at the time, spoke Hebrew fluently with the proper accent. I could do the properly. Then moved to, it's so confusing to me. It's not really, but it's so many places. Annapolis, Maryland for 2 years. And then high school was in Chicago, Skokie, Illinois. Then back to Israel again for a year, for a post-high school year, where I studied in Mevaseret Yeshiva, as I think you did too. And then I went to NYU, lived in New York, got a degree in finance, but really I met Andrew Brown, who was my poker mentor, teacher, and learned poker, and never did anything with the college degree really. But I stayed in New York a few years and then moved to Vegas. Education was always completely strict Orthodox Jewish schools. Kind of more moderate within the Orthodox thing until high school. And then high school, Skokie Yeshiva is kind of like maybe in between modern Orthodox and Haredi Orthodox. For those like that aren't aware what that would be, like my high school was like starting at 7:30 in the morning, going on the early days going till 6:30, on the later days going till 8:30. Sunday half day school, only boys. Secular studies was from 3 to 6:30 p.m. The rest was religious studies.
So we call it the dual curriculum. That's what we call
it. Yeah. And basically it meant when I got to college, and only had a few hours of class a day. I was like, what? Is this really considered like like a full-time education? Like, what do we do like the rest of the time? So I spent a
Yep.
lot of time playing poker.
Interesting. Yeah, so we're going to
Yeah.
dive into a couple areas there. First of all, I got to give the shout out also to Bar-Ilan University. That's where I graduated from. So,
Okay,
like I
great.
said, a lot in common. So what I know is that, typically the modern Orthodox Jewish families, you tend to sort of stay rooted for many years in a specific community. How is it that you moved around to so many places? And did you find that difficult socially a little bit?
To start with the first, I guess each place kind of had their thing of why we left. Mainly they have to do with my father's job. But South Africa, we kind of only got there. It was my like dad's first position, and then wasn't the most safe place to be. It's not where my parents really wanted to raise us. Australia was pretty good, and we were there. That was the spot we spent the longest as a child. I'm not 100% sure exactly. There are a few like small little issues, I guess, but no like major issue for why we left. But it's far from everything like, the whole family. Like anytime you want to go visit or travel anywhere, it's like a round the world trip.
Yeah.
Uh, Annapolis, Maryland was there were no Jewish schools there, so the first year I went to school in Silver Spring, which was a 45-minute drive, and then the next year in Baltimore, which was a 45-minute drive. And
It's a lot of time to sit and think.
yes, yeah. But basically, like going into high school, it was going to be that my younger sister was going to end at 3, my brother was going to end at 4, and I was going to end at 5. So it kind of doesn't really work to do like that 45-minute commute with those time travels. And so each place had their thing for why it didn't work. Socially, it was somewhat difficult, I would say, at times. Mainly, I was pretty okay with it. I didn't love, like almost every place that I left, I kind of didn't love leaving. And then some took a little more time to get used to. But most of the time it was pretty okay. But maybe, I don't know. I mean, obviously, everyone's upbringing leads to what kind of person they are. And so there were definitely like pros and cons to it. But like,
did it bring your family sort of closer together? Because, at least the few people who could understand what you've gone through because they went through it with you.
I never have really thought about it in those terms. We are a very tight, close-knit family, so maybe yes. But at the same time, when I was a teenager, I wouldn't say like I kind of was loving to leave home the second I could at 18. So yeah, there was, but I am very close with my family.
That's cool.
Now. Yeah.
Good. So let's talk about that dual curriculum, all those hours spent in school, hitting the books, studying, I'm sure with friends as well and studying in class. Does that leave much time for other recreational activities? So what you do on like, you said even half day Sunday you were in school. That's something I never did. I didn't do Sunday school. But what did you used to do on weekends, holidays? Were you part of like any youth movements or summer camps, that sort of thing?
So in Australia, I was a member of a group called B'nai Akiva, which you probably know, which is like a religious Zionist group. And I was always into sports, no matter where the place was. So in Australia, it was the Australian sports like Australian football and cricket.
Wow.
And then in the US, it was more basketball and baseball kind of thing. Probably playing wise, more basketball. And so, so a lot of my like non-school time or studying time was that I was always though a very serious student and into studying. I read history books for fun. So I mean, I guess like one of the things I was into in high school, which I kind of lost, but maybe would have been. I kind of wish that certain things would have been, well, anyway, fantasy sports. I was like super into But then when I got into poker, I got out of those.
Right.
And then like now with the daily fantasy sports, it would be like a merging of both worlds, but I'm completely out of following
Right.
sports. So it's not, I never did get into that.
You kind of really have to be all in on each of those pursuits to, to master it, I guess.
And yeah, I mean, poker has gone quite okay. So it's not like,
thank God.
yeah.
So, obviously you made one heck of a career for yourself, one of the more successful professional poker players in the world. But, like me, getting involved in the poker world isn't necessarily something that the typical good Jewish boy tends to aspire to as a kid. So what did you think you were going to do when you grew up before you met Andrew at NYU?
So I was majoring in finance, and NYU is right by Wall Street. I was thinking something in that area wasn't, fully developed or even partially developed, but that's why I was thinking about starting off. In college, I really liked classes like that maybe eventually led to like management consulting world. Like I liked, there were a lot of like consulting style courses or whatever ideas that I found that stuff very interesting. So yeah, maybe something in those, but I have always liked history related stuff also, but I don't know what kind of career that really leads to. So that was not something I kind of thought about going back now that I'm more, financially secure and not, would be able to maybe work or do something, where money isn't the primary I somewhat consider, but it's a lot of work. And
for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever saw the movie Sliding Doors. Does that ring a bell at all?
I have not, no.
Okay. It's kind of the idea being like there's a sliding doors moment. If you make the subway train or if you don't make it, what changes as a result, like a butterfly effect thing.
Yeah.
So do you ever kind of have a moment like that, wondering like what your alternate timeline would have looked like had you not discovered poker and made a career out of it?
I haven't thought about it much, but yeah, I mean, so many things, everything. I like poker players love to like think about those, like, if this card would have come differently or whatever. So yeah, I more have thought about that, where, at different times in my career, different things would, I mean, I can't imagine, like, even once I did get into poker, if the first month probably even like would have gone differently, there's almost no chance I would have
but you weren't like making coin in that first month. I remember you were making like 5 cents, 12 cents, like how differently could it go?
Or like once I got more serious, like once I stopped my job, that when I was thinking first month, I was thinking more like that, but whatever it is, whether first year, first week, the whole time, or once when I really first started and was playing for very small amounts, like if I wouldn't have even had that like little inkling of results, like there's a good chance. But yeah, things at so many different stages, could have gone differently, of course.
Interesting to hear that perspective. So the following little nugget came from the Poker Stories podcast. Shout out to Julio Rodriguez from the Card Player magazine. You used to be a balcore. That's for those unversed in that, it's a designated reader of the weekly Torah portion. Talk a little bit about what that involves and why that's something you liked, that you chose to do.
So what that involves is there's like a special tune that you have to sing parts of the Bible every week. It's a different part, and basically they split the whole Torah into 50 portions, and it's quite a bit of work to be able to learn that and study it each week, so you have a decent idea. Even though like compared to like the true professionals, I was quite poor, but I was good enough for the shows that I did work at. And like I was doing it in not my own area. So like for the audience, like you're not allowed to drive on the Sabbath as an Orthodox Jew. So I would walk, like depending on where I was working, for lack of a better word, that week, between half an hour and an hour each way.
Oh, wow.
And this was in Chicago, where especially the winters are quite bad. So
Wow.
I remember like quite a few super cold walks, and even the summer, that's not really a fun
Right.
long walk. But I did get paid for it, and I learned a kind of skill that can stay with you forever or a long time.
Mm-hmm. And which was it? Was it, getting a little extra pocket money, or that skill that, I mean, to walk every single week, for
Yeah,
quite a
yeah. I
while.
mean, I like to think about all kinds of things are a lot of things are on a scale and not
Mm-hmm.
either or. I don't think I would have done it had I not gotten paid. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I would have done it if it was only money and
Right.
no other things. So a little bit of both.
Okay. So you
Yeah.
have sort of a brief history of earning money not as a professional poker player. So besides
Yes.
that job, what other sort of jobs, if any, did you have?
Yeah. I definitely. I was very motivated young. I worked at I had a couple of summer style jobs throughout high school. One of them I worked at a Jewish day camp,
Mm.
integrating a child who had developmental
Oh, wow.
disabilities,
Wow.
like into a regular camp setting. So there would be, a group of, 15, 20 kids
Mm-hmm.
with two counselors, and then I would be the third counselor. But my
Mm.
specialty was like, dealing with the one child who, had the one-on-one, but I was also kind of the number three for the entire group.
Right.
I did that all 4 years of high school
That's
every
beautiful.
summer.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
What
and
did
that
what did
was
you learn from that experience?
um, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint one thing, but there's no doubt I learned so many things, and I still have very fond memories. The kid that I worked with the first summer, we're Facebook friends, and I like keep saying the next time I go back to Chicago that we're gonna meet up again. And we have I had a really good relationship, and also I was the youngest counselor at that time. I was probably like 14,
Uh-huh.
and he was maybe like 10 or 11.
Oh,
So
wow. Okay.
yeah,
So you have
so
a relationship for sure.
yeah. And then just like each summer had its own thing, and like the people I worked with were great, and it was a really good rewarding job.
Beautiful.
And then I would also do another summer job, which was working at baseball games, selling water, hot dogs, peanuts, just like
That's amazing.
yeah,
In
as
Chicago for the Cubs?
in Cubs and White Sox, yeah.
Wow. Was this,
Um,
you obviously get to watch the games for free.
if you want, so it's a commission-based job. So some people kind of took it easy and ended up watching a lot of the games, and
Mhm.
other people hustled more. It was commission and tips. It was a great, very exciting job,
Sure.
and pretty good money. And a weird quirk was like in those days, I think this is not true anymore, but like half the vendors, that's what we were called, like we would go through the seats, half of them were Orthodox Jewish kids.
No kidding.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
I didn't
So
know
like
that. Wow.
it was just like this like Chicago tradition. So
Huh.
everyone was doing it, so I did it too.
Nice.
And
And there was
yeah,
some
yeah.
great Chicago team. The White Sox and the Cubs were pretty good
Yeah.
in the 90s.
So yeah, in those days, the White Sox, like no one went to the games, but the commission was high there, and then the
Nice.
Cubs were like, some years they were good. A lot. This was Sammy Sosa was a All-Star at that time, and
Sure.
some years were great, but didn't make a difference.
Right.
The games were
Well, of
sold
course.
out. But yeah, but like I think my sophomore year of in between sophomore and junior year was crazy. I would wake up at 5:30 and go to Daf Yomi
Mhm.
every day, which is learning a page of Talmud, and
Wow.
then go to morning prayers at like 6:30, then go work at the day camp, and then some nights, not too often, but like Sundays for sure, I would go to baseball games, and so yeah, it was
That's
yeah,
so sick. We in poker we often say, who loves it more? Like that kind of
yeah,
dedication, man. That's
yeah,
a really amazing thing, and obviously it's
yeah.
a transferable skill for anything that you're passionate about, and that's pretty
Exactly.
cool.
Yeah.
And also just, like a little sort of a brief hiatus in it, nachta, for our audience is that, again, most of the interviews Ari does, like, to me, this is really cool. It's really, interesting to see this side of you. We know about your poker side, and I hope you're all so far interested, finding an interest in Ari's life beyond the felt. I'm wondering, do those earlier years of yours, living regular life, talking about these sorts of jobs you did just like anyone else, non-poker wise, did that make you sort of, or maybe even till today, make you look at money a little differently than, perhaps the typical professional poker player does?
Yeah, probably. I'm much more conservative than the average poker player, definitely the average professional poker player, kind of always have been. My parents are quite conservative when it comes to like financial issues. Also, Andrew Brown, who taught me how to play poker, was very reckless when it came to these.
Okay.
So I kind of learned from him some things. Well, I don't even know if I learned not to do, but basically I saw the kind of things he was doing, and I thought I did not want to do that. The swings and things like that. But there's definitely like a lot of people like view this, oh wow, that's so smart that he's smart with his money, or but it's not that clear, because there's a lot to be said, especially early on, I think, to taking those shots. Especially like once I had a poker resume where if things didn't go my way, I'd be able to get backing fairly easily. So like the downside isn't really as bad as I might have imagined in my own mind. And I spent a lot of time playing, smaller binds than maybe I could have or should have, but maybe that was good. But I can see kind of when you were asking about like these alternative paths, maybe I would be like playing Jungleman if I, and playing the highest stakes if I would be more willing to. Probably not. I'm not saying like, but but there's some chance I like limited my own growth by my conservatism, and there's also some chance that I avoided going busto and not being a poker player. So yeah.
I'm referring more beyond just like the bankroll management aspect of it. I guess I could sort of relate it with a story of my own. A buddy and I, we once played, I was playing 1-2 and he was playing 2-5. Both of us happened to have over 3 hours, pretty incredible sessions. I won close to $700 at 1-2 in a cash game, and he won like $2,200 also in the same 3-hour time span playing 2-5. We decided, oh my God, this is just great. Quit while you're ahead. Let's just go for a walk on the strip. And it's really hot. It's the summer and we're dying of thirst. And he's like, let me just go and get a bottle of water. He comes back. You don't have no water. I'm like, what happened? He says, they wanted $5 for a bottle of water. And these, a couple of guys who just won $700, $2,200. And I think, yeah, that totally makes sense. I wouldn't pay $5 for a bottle of water. We're still, normal type of transactional mentality. So that's what I'm sort of wondering is, you did all these things. You were a vendor, you earned, pocket money as a balcor and all these sorts of things. Do you, would you pay $5 for the water, knowing that, you refer to thousands as K, I'll pay the 25K and 10K?
Yeah. Yeah. I would be less likely to, I would say, than most people in my position in the poker world. Having said that, I've been in the poker world a long time, and I, most years I probably do between $500,000 and $1 million. Well, not quite. I've never made it to $1 million in buy-ins, but whatever it is, north of 500K buy-ins for sure. The last like half a dozen years, for sure. So when you talk about will my expenses for the year and total buy-ins and everything be 500,000 or 500,000 and $5, it's hard to be too yeah, but at the same time, like let's say I do have 500,000 in buy-ins in a year, there's a good chance like my maybe I had 600K in cashes, and the difference between having 10,000 or 20,000 more or less expenses, that does turn into a significant amount of the actual profits that you're able to. So it is something that I've always focused in, not just like poker players always focus on top line, like getting the revenues as high
Sure.
as they can, and a lot of them don't focus on getting the expenses under control.
Yep.
And both of them, and sometimes there's a lot more low-hanging fruit by getting those expenses. And it's like, it's a lot, a lot of poker players are very stressed about money. But if you have like less overhead, it becomes like all of a sudden it's much easier to play at the poker table if like you don't need that money to cover the rent. So it becomes an easier thing, sometimes being like a little more conservative about those issues.
I had a hunch you'd start talking about that, so it dovetails very nicely into my next question. I know that you've always been very into the airline mileage schemes and stuff like that, the credit card sign-up bonuses. Can you kind of tell us sort of what that whole thing looks like being into it? Because obviously part of the reason you do it is very much to lower the overhead, get the miles, and then you're traveling more for free than for pay. So what does that sort of look like, and how much time and effort do you invest in kind of like maximizing the freebies?
So for a couple of years, I probably spent like a fair amount of time on it. And I was into it, and kind of like, as you can hear from my, past, like if I get into something, I get like super into it.
Sure.
And wanted to learn a lot, and kind of see like I've been homeless since I did the air quotes. I don't know if I made it on. I've been homeless since 2013, since the beginning of 2013.
Wow.
So I wanted to see like what kind of benefits it could help, and then some of the things I learned are quite beneficial to me, and then a lot of things that I learned turned out, okay, that's not really that beneficial to me.
Interesting.
So so like one of those things, like I wouldn't feel that comfortable spending like 4, 5, 6 times as much to fly business class for these long flights and stuff like that. But it is very nice to, I travel to Australia every year, for example, and the difference between being able to sleep on the flights and come in somewhat fresh and all that, like it actually does make a difference for like the first 3-4 tournaments, which,
sure,
maybe I put in 12K in buy-ins in those first 3-4 tournaments. And if I increase my ROI by 10%, like, so there are all these different kind of ideas that come into play. So I've found where the thing that I like for my own lifestyle is getting these kind of luxuries, I would say, that I wouldn't feel so comfortable spending on, and then I get, in a cheaper way or just for free, right. Get like a more better quality of life for my situation. But there's like things like some of these cards, most of the time you can't buy into a tournament with the credit card, and if you can, it's very high fees, but there are a few stops where you can. And now you can get like 3 to 5% back on your tournament buy-ins by using credit. Like it's completely free money. Like, not doing those kind of things, like the super low hanging fruit like that, is just doesn't make sense to me. So yeah.
Sure. You say that not all professional poker players do this sort of stuff. Is this the kind of thing, we're always looking for an edge on our opponents, but this doesn't directly affect us negatively, like this is, especially when it's lowering your expenses, it doesn't, hurt Ari Engel that Robbie Straczynski lowered his expenses, and then he'll be facing you. Right. Is this the kind of thing you actively try to spread to more players, or are people just doing it and not as public about it?
No, I've definitely shared this with a lot of players. Shared information and things like that. There is some level of work involved with these things, but a lot of times it's not very much. And I have a number of friends, acquaintances over the years that have come to me and we've had discussions, phone calls, and stuff like that, to help them better take advantage of these things. In the US, signing up for credit cards is like they'll pay you $500 like to sign up for a credit card and spend a few thousand, and doing that, maybe twice a year, like it's $1,000 a year, whatever everyone puts money on credit cards, so you just do it on a new card each year. So these kind of things are very easy to do. If you want to go very hard and try and make 8K instead of 1K from that might be a little more work. But those things are doable too. And so like among my like closer, even extended circle of friends, I've like pitched at different times to almost all of them at some stage that they should get involved. And then a lot of times, like someone who I just played with, who I'm not really, friends per se with, but just acquaintances, they'll ask me questions and we'll have conversations about it.
Nice. That's it's the type of thing you're saying. It reminds me of like there's a great Jewish book called A Candle a Day. It reminds me of like if you take from one candle and light another flame, it doesn't diminish that candle. That's a pretty cool thing to be, and someone really appreciates a tip like that because it's genuinely either putting money in their pocket or keeping money in their pocket. That's a beautiful thing. You talked about typically like $500,000 in buy-ins for a year at the stage that you're at right now. That's purely the buy-ins to the tournaments, or does that also include the expenses of the travel, of the lodging, that sort of thing?
That's just buy-ins, and I mean, we shot through 500K a couple of years ago, and it just seems to go up and up every year. It doesn't really go down. I mean, barring COVID times. So it's crazy, but
can you sort of ballpark what the additional expense is when you're talking about $500,000 in buy-ins? Just so people get an idea of what you have to cover before you're showing your first dollar in profit.
Maybe like 100,000 additional to that, but that's a little harder for me to ballpark. I'm lucky to have a really good accountant, and I just send him all the different things and piecemeal, and he adds up everything. So I actually don't have like a great idea of what my expenses are, and especially with the lifestyle I live, it's very variable. And I don't know, in normal times, I don't know where I'm going to be in 2-3 weeks most of the time. I have some ideas and some general thoughts. So I try, and that's like one of the things that I like to do is live a very flexible kind that, you can, as a professional poker player, you're your own boss. You have a lot of freedom and flexibility, and different people take that in different directions. And the direction I like to take it in is just being very flexible as to where I'm going, what I'm doing. If I feel like showing up to work, I do. If I don't, I don't. If I want to play online, if I want to play live, if I want to play cash, whatever,
or sleep late. Make up for those mornings at 5:30 when you're waking up for WOE. So interesting. That's definitely insightful, and again, and the little nugget from there. Guys, got to get yourself a good accountant. This is a lot of interesting stuff. I know from someone who sits at home 90% of the year, accountants can be, somewhat complex. So it's important to have the right people on your team. In poker, it's important to sort of change gears. So we'll change gears just slightly, just a little pivot. You had mentioned before that you and I did attend the same yeshiva, Higher Institute of Torah Learning in Mevaseret Zion, just situate people just outside of Jerusalem. And you talked about this sort of flexibility. You like the flexibility. Up until then, with all of the various schedules and situations you were in, it's very like, this is what you got to do. And all of a sudden, for the first time in your life, you're really out on your own in the world. That's typical for many people post high school. You've got a year and, okay, I can do what I want to do. I mean, of course you sit and learn, but you're pretty free for the first time. Do you have any sort of favorite memories or highlights from that year?
So I had lived in Australia 3 to 11 years old. So what basically happens within the modern Orthodox Jewish world is everyone your age group from around the world goes to Israel in that year. So I was able to reconnect with a lot of friends and even made new friends from that Australian group. I also had, friends in my yeshiva and stuff like that I made, but that was very cool, just like from a social perspective, just, making and building relationships and friendships with different people. I did love that. Even in the context of yeshiva with fairly strict rules, it was, so much freedom compared to high school.
Yeah.
Of course, very little freedom compared to college, which was coming, but
Right.
you don't know, at the time.
Right.
It's just, great, and it was good. I was into learning, so I enjoyed like the Jewish learning that I did. But at the same time, I enjoyed, going out with my friends and drinking and eating and stuff like that.
Good stuff. Reminds me
Yeah.
of my year as well. And I don't know if the authorities at the yeshiva are listening to this one, but look, anyone who's gone, they know that occasionally there are those little late night poker home games that go on in the dormitories there. I know you said Andrew Brown is how you sort of discovered an NYU. You were never the least bit curious to play in those home games?
No, I did.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. I remember we played using Q-tips for chips. We didn't have chips around, but we had, like people brought from America with them, like Costco size, boxes of different
Amazing.
things. So yeah, it was Q-tips, the late night. Yeah. So I was not a good poker player like in those games. I remember, some other, guys were definitely better than me in those games. And I wasn't really thinking about the game much in like this strategic. When I credit like Andrew with introducing me, it was introducing me to like a strategic way, even though it was, when we think about like advanced 2003 poker,
right,
compared to like advanced 2021, it's completely different world. But the idea of thinking about poker in this strategic sense, that's really where he came into play. I had played a little bit beforehand,
but it was more for a social, fun type of experience.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You win a lot of Q-tips, Ari?
I don't remember how I did. Definitely, it wasn't major one way or another.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I had to ask. So
yeah.
When you first started out on the circuit, like I said, something that caught my eye, and I imagine many other people's eyes, that you wore one of these yarmulkes, the skull caps, and I wear one all the time, but only in my home games, never out when I'm playing poker. And I play plenty of poker in the poker rooms when I go. Part of the reason I don't, and I usually just wear a hat, is I don't want to draw too much kind of like extra attention to myself while I'm playing. While I'm doing my media work, no problem, whatever. But I'm kind of wondering, you did wear it out in the poker rooms. Is that sort of something you felt early in your career? And is that also part of the reason why you stopped wearing it, for the extra attention?
So it did get some extra attention, but I growing up Orthodox and stuff like that, I was just used to sometimes being stared at, sometimes being, and well, it's true that it's a little more prevalent in the poker room, and especially in some of the more like far-flung places that, or I shouldn't say they're far, they're just like places that don't have a lot of Orthodox Jews.
Right.
So they're not used to having people wear a yarmulke there. So there were a couple of being stared at or things like that. Didn't bother me really, and I did feel that one playing with people, that it was actually a strategic advantage.
Really?
Yeah. I think when people think of, well, firstly, most people wouldn't have the greatest idea of what it meant. They would know that you're religious to some extent. Maybe it has to do with Judaism. We know that, modern Orthodox Jews basically live lifestyles like fairly similar to a lot of other people, but in a lot of people's mindsets, they would have a difficult, they kind of like think like they're seeing a member of the Taliban show up,
I guess so, yeah.
And when you think about like an extreme religious person, you're probably thinking someone who doesn't spend much time studying poker
Sure.
or thinking about it in a strategic kind of way.
So they
So
underestimated you.
I felt like people did underestimate me. Yeah.
Interesting.
Um,
Huh.
I was also very young, and there might have been a combination of a whole thing. When I started playing, just in general, like online players were looked down and kind of thought that they weren't good. So there was like, here was this like young, super religious guy. The whole combo seemed like it was beneficial rather than not. And if people were gonna, stare at me a little differently, it didn't. That
Interesting.
negative didn't, outweigh the positive.
Maybe I'll try it and see how it works out. Okay, we'll see.
Yeah.
You mentioned you're exceptionally close with your family, and especially for someone who moves around as much as you currently do for the last 8 years, I think that's a beautiful thing. Family is always so important. Over the years, I've seen on social media how supportive they are of you and how proud they are of your success. One might argue that such a supportive position for choosing the career of a professional poker player is atypical, let's say, for the modern Orthodox Jewish household.
And not only, yes, I can imagine there's many Orthodox rabbis that would be supportive of their kids becoming a professional poker player, and then combine that with some family members having gambling problems in the past.
Wow.
So for sure, it's like unbelievable that like combination of factors, and then for my parents to be so positive and supportive of me. It's a beautiful thing, and it's great, and it's testament to well, there's no chance that this is what they wanted for me. Once I did choose to do this, they became extremely supportive. And it's,
how long did that take? You have to show them sort of like the winning record.
It was so I remember in college, I where I was playing very low stakes, but too many hours, objectively too many hours when we're spending a lot of money to attend a prestigious school. I hid my play from them. Not, they were not close to me. They were actually living in New Zealand at the time, so it wasn't that difficult to hide the play, but I did. When I decided to become a professional player, they had like co-signed loans with me, and actually took out a second mortgage on their house to help me. So I did, get their blessing to, after having, I kind of had a little bit of success and made 6 months of my salary, which was in a job which was not what I had majored in. So I was in a very poor job, which was only supposed to be a temporary thing. But I did get their blessing to do that. And which was, so it was very, very quickly that the support was there. And then it's definitely grown over time. Basically, like traditional Jewish life involves, big Friday night, Saturday day meals, especially as the rabbi of the community, having guests over. And basically every time I'm around there, up until today, the topic of poker comes up, and I make my pitch as to how poker is not like blackjack, not like craps, much more like investing, much more like a real estate speculator, or that kind of world. And so from early on, when I would go visit New Zealand and started making those pitches, to now they live in Southern Florida, and that's happened. So they can make that pitch for me just as well. And and cool. So they believe in what I'm doing, and they understand how, they certainly would not like to have someone who is a professional negative EV gambler, kind of lifestyle, but what I do is acceptable to them, and
Well, and I can confirm that. It's not that you need the confirmation, but I listened to one of your talks in the last couple of months. You gave a Zoom talk to the members of that congregation, and it was pretty eye-opening, when you frame it through the eyes of the investment and, using very much the same terminology as used in the finance world. And all of a sudden, hey, this thing does kind of start to make sense when you approach it the right way. You approach it like a business in a way.
Yeah. And I'm very disciplined, and stuff like that. So yeah.
For sure. Ari, there's an old Yiddish saying, man tracht und Gott lacht. Man plans and God laughs. Nevertheless, what are your plans? Have you got a plan for the next year, 5 years, 10 years in the future?
Not very much. I don't have a lot of plans. I can see my life going in a lot of different ways. I could see it being quite similar to the way the last 5 years have been, and I could see big changes. And I'm fairly open-minded as to how it will go. I'm quite content with my current life, but at the same time, you don't want to just settle and be okay with no continued growth or improvement in my life. So I can see, obviously, like the big question, kind of medium to long term, is whether I want to have a family and kids and stuff like that. And well, that starts with meeting the right, wife, partner. But I don't know. I'm very, like I said, I'm very content with my current life. I wouldn't mind, finding the right person to be with. But I live a very unique kind of lifestyle, and it makes settling down, I guess, for lack of a better word, a big challenging, and just like it would be a huge change to my life. So I don't know if it will happen or not, and I'm kind of okay with whichever way it goes. I would like to have kids more than not like to, but I don't want to just like force myself. Okay, I gotta get married, I gotta have kids now. It's gotta happen. I don't feel that pressure.
I guess time will tell if that's meant to be, and if the right person comes along to steal your heart away from the felt. My final question before we move into the community questions for you, Ari, we're not supposed to be necessarily goal-oriented in poker. I want to make a certain amount of money or anything like that, because that could sometimes tend to lead towards disappointment. The general goals lead towards improvement, to be more well-rounded, that sort of a thing. Do you have any sort of specific, if not goals, then things that you are working on as far as your skill set, things you do want to improve, get better at?
So I have started playing a lot more mixed games. I always played them and messed around in them. I've been playing course tournaments on full tilt since 2006, I would say.
Wow.
And I play tons of Omaha high-low just over the last 10, 12 years. In the last 3 years, I've definitely played more Omaha high-low than I have no limit hold'em. And so I like playing those games. I don't know to what extent I want to play more of them or less of them. I'm not at the same, so like, I'm definitely a better no limit hold'em player than I've been probably at any stage in the past, but I am worse relative to the top players than I was for many of the past 10, 12 years.
Interesting qualification there.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where, I don't know. I definitely have to get, if I want to compete at the highest, and again, like if I want to compete at the high levels, I got to get better at no limit hold'em, or I can just be content and not play the highest of high levels and play somewhat reasonably high levels and still be quite good. But yeah, so like poker, which is one of the things that I've loved, is it's very much a meritocracy, and it doesn't make a difference who you know. It doesn't make a difference that I used to be really good, or, that I have a lot of career winnings, like that doesn't make a difference. Like to tomorrow's game, if someone is better, they're gonna have the expected value from tomorrow's game, and I will not. So it's one of those things where there's, in the poker sense, I have a lot of work to do, even though I am quite good and very successful and all that. But yeah, I don't know if that's a goal necessarily, but that's kind of where my mind went when you asked the question.
Okay.
But yeah, it's an interesting thing when you said like not having like financial goals, like you said at the beginning, like my career cashes, which might be like 7 million or something. One day, one tournament is 15% of that. So I've been playing 15 years of poker, and one tournament is 15% of that entire number. So yeah, having like number-based goals just doesn't work, doesn't make sense. Yeah.
Someone, I forget who wrote, I think it was Marley, on the that the tagline of the Hendon Mobs site should be, well, how much did you lose though? Or something like that. Something like that. No, of course, it's never, we know about the earnings, but there's certainly a lot more than meets the eye in the numbers that you see online. So
for sure, yeah.
So this is now the segment of the show that we turn to all of you listening and watching our Cards Chat community to see what questions you wanted to ask our guests. We have a dedicated thread on the Cards Chat forum for this. So as we announce who our future guests will be, please be sure to send in your questions. And a couple of people who have sent in questions this time are Crystals and Acid Burn FX, two great, very often big-time contributors to each of our shows here on the Cards Chat podcast. So Crystals asked, you have had two massive cashes at the Aussie Millions in 2016 and at the WSOP in 2019. Of those two, which Ari would you say was tougher to win?
Which was the tougher? Neither of them like stick out as definitely tougher than the other. I think the average player was tougher in World Series, but I would guess the field size was small, or my recollection is the field size was smaller in the World Series tournament. And it was a later year. Every year the poker world gets tougher. So I guess I'm gonna answer the World Series was a tougher thing. But Aussie Millions was definitely more meaningful to me first because it happened first. It was bigger and more, even though I wouldn't say necessarily life-changing, but more towards that, life-changing idea.
Interesting. And I'll just sort of throw in a follow-up here to Crystal's question. Famously, your heads-up opponent there was Tony Dunst. I don't remember who your opponent was at WSOP. Does that make it perhaps also more meaningful, more challenging? Is that a factor that you had there when you were making the judgment call?
Yeah, so a couple of interesting stories regarding that. Firstly, like it's somewhat famous story that Tony Dunst lost a 5K chip when he was in line to register. So he was playing for a relatively small percentage of himself. And Mike McDonald, Timex, had a very big percentage of himself. And me and Tony are good friends, and go up to Tony, you want to discuss the deal. It was a 400,000 plus difference between first and second.
Right.
So I've never played for stakes like that before.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah. And basically he goes, it's not my money, it's Mike McDonald's money, go talk with the master. And Mike McDonald, maybe seeing that I was so eager to chop, maybe thinking Tony had an edge. At that, Tony is great player, phenomenal player, but I think he would say himself that he's gotten way better in the last few years. And at that time, he was kind of out of the poker world to some extent, playing wise. He was more involved in daily fantasy sports, I believe, and just not as serious of a player. So I thought I had an edge, and I never agreed to take less than what the chips would dictate, less than the ICM value. But in that spot, given that the money was so big, And given that they didn't want to do a deal, I actually did offer to take less than what the fair share would be.
Wow.
And they said no. So
And you stuck
that
it to
made it,
him.
yeah. So it made it extra special.
Cool.
In the World Series heads up, I was playing against a guy. His last name is Malongo. He's not very well known in the live world, maybe, especially not among like the hardcore players. But he's a phenomenal online player. Very, very unorthodox. One of just like seeing him play that tournament was kind of crazy. I got so unbelievably lucky heads up. We started, he was 2-1 chip lead, and it lasted like 7 hands. And
Oh my God. Wow.
I think I won every hand, and maybe I lost one of them. And the huge hand, I got it in quite bad. And then the final hand, I got it in really bad. So I just got like that World Series. I remember after I went through, I had, I think, 12 all-in pre-flops where I was behind and won.
Wow.
So
variants, eventually you got to win some of those, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, the World Series was always my kryptonite, I think they say. I had done so unbelievably poorly at World Series. It was my 15th year going to the World Series, and I had never made a final 9. And I played quite a few tournaments, and I'd hired a mental health coach at one stage, and I was, my close friends had to bear the brunt of me crying a lot about, can I do it? How? What's the story? Is it the summer? Is it the desert?
Right.
Is it what's the story? Is it because it wasn't just Rio, even it was like everywhere in Vegas in June, July.
Wow.
Well, like I did well in May, I did well in June, in November, but June and July I never did anything, and then all of a sudden my numbers are okay in June and July. Like that's tournament poker, basically.
Right.
Well,
you must be very happy that this year's World Series is going to be October, November. So that's works in your favor, I guess.
Yeah.
And just, you mentioned Tony Dunst. Shout out to Tony. He was episode number 11. Always a good occasion to let our audience know we've got a couple dozens now of other episodes that you can listen back to here on the CardsChat podcast. Back to Crystal's question number 2, Ari. You have played poker all over the world. Where has been the most memorable place you have traveled to for poker?
Aussie Millions, not to go back to it, but that's what comes to mind right away. By far my biggest score. Going to Australia in January, where it's like bad weather in the US, and there usually is a break in tournament poker towards the end of December. So it's it's a really nice place. Like a lot of, like let's say in LA, if you go to tournaments there, usually the casinos are in the bad part of town, or in most US cities, they're in the bad part of town. In Melbourne, it's like in the nice part, in the beautiful part of town. And so you have that. It's just like great casino, great tournaments. Cool. That's what comes to mind.
Nice. And finally, from Crystals, considering your birthplace and the number of great Canadian poker players out there, you have very few big cashes on your Hendon Mob in Canada. And I will just note you're number 11 on the all-time list in Canada. Why do you think that is?
I would argue and perhaps question Crystal's research. I think I've done quite well. So firstly, there aren't tons of Canadian tournaments that are kind of big enough to warrant traveling to. Let's say $1,500 or higher main events. Most of them take place in Montreal at Playground.
Right. And
I find that to be a great venue to play poker. I really enjoy going there. I usually go there like 3-4 times a year. I final tabled. There was a big party poker. I don't know what the brand name might have been called. Millions. It might have had a different name. Tournament there in like maybe 2017. I got like 5th, I think, for a 6-figure score. I feel like I've done fairly well there. And but maybe like the lack of tons of scores is just a lack of, like, there aren't that many tournaments that
Fair. And now on to Acid Burn FX. Always asks some of the most creative questions. So we've saved
with a
these
name
for
like
last.
that. Who would have thought?
So we got two final questions before we wrap it up. Okay. What memory would you erase if you could?
Nothing comes to mind. I mean, I have some bad beats and stuff like that, but I don't know, I mean, I wouldn't say. Usually also in tournament poker, the high equity bad beats will be when you're really deep in the tournament. So like the worst bad beat I took, I'm not going to go through the hand, don't worry, audience, but I got fifth in a really big tournament, so I still got fifth in that really big tournament. Like,
Right.
Yeah, sure, so there's usually a decent consolation prize for that. I'm really lucky. Like, I grew up in a loving household and everything was, overall great. I don't have, any like traumatic memories that come to mind. Yeah.
Beautiful. That's an amazing answer to have to a question like that.
Yeah.
Finally, and I guess this is just a little bit out there, but it's a great question. What is the biggest challenge of your life?
So going back to the last question, I've been very blessed, very fortunate to whatever the true answer to that question is going to be. It's going to be like I feel like it's probably in like the bottom 10% of like people, for like challenging, like biggest challenge of my life. It's just been like so unbelievably smooth. Like I was, if we look at my poker career, I got into it in seriously in like 03, 04 time, just as it was like steaming up, and anyone who was trying to think about it strategically and work somewhat hard was very likely to do well and make money. And I got this unbelievable base, both financially and like mentally and like strategically and all that, like, so that even though I have, of course, gone on swings and stuff like that, having that base is just makes it so much easier. So poker wise, it's not been like an unbelievable challenge. And then outside of poker, I got into poker at such a young age that, I went to college, and then after college, I became a professional poker player. I've had really, really lucky life.
Awesome. Beautiful.
Yeah.
That's an amazing answer. And again, also just, very self-aware to acknowledge, that you've run good in a good way. And that's a pretty cool thing.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much to everyone who sent in questions for Ari Engel. And again, just a reminder to our Cards Chat community, we'd love to see you submit your questions for our future podcast guests in the dedicated thread on the forums. Please be sure to give us a good review on iTunes and spread the word via your social media channels if you'd like the show. Ari, before we let you go, anything else you'd like to tell our listeners and people watching?
Rate, review, give 5 stars. No, thanks for having me, Robbie. It's been nice chatting, and it's cool that it's cool to be in this opportunity in this like kind of world where people actually want to talk to me and just like
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. And like I said at the beginning, we wanted to get to know Ari deeper, and we all know it's not what's outside, but rather what's inside that counts the most. The Ari Engel that I've gotten to know over the years, and I think that we've all gotten to know over this last hour, and that the poker community knows is a true class act, what we call an absolute mensch, and a great representative for our game, and I would say also for our tribe, the chosen people. Thanks again so much, Ari. Thank you for tuning in once again, everybody, to another episode of the Cards Chat Podcast. I'm Robbie Straczynski. You can follow me on Twitter @CardPlayerLife, and I wish you all a wonderful day.